So an idea of reimagining Hannibal Lecter, to do it for, whether it be television or for another venue. Not another film, definitely. We've done, actually, there have been 5 movies based on Thomas Harris's work. We actually were toying with the idea with MGM, who has the Clarice character from the library of Orion Pictures that did Silence of the Lambs. And we were talking about doing something Clarice and Hannibal in the time period after Silence of the Lambs. But we really didn't take it very far. And in fact, I felt that perhaps Hannibal would be a very, very minor character and then perhaps just disappear. And I didn't feel that was right for the character of Hannibal Lecter. The big question was, where do I go with something that is, for me, a very, very important franchise to the future of my company and also my relationship with Thomas Harris, where I wanted to do it absolutely right and have him be proud. So that's where actually meeting Gaumont International Television, and they were just starting out and wanting to have big franchises. And so it was kind of great timing. And then through Katie O'Connell, heading up Gaumont, and also Christophe Riandi in Paris, France, just everybody was just so excited about the possibility.
Tasteless.
Do you have trouble with taste?
My thoughts are often not tasty.
No, mine.
So then a question of whether I wanted to make this Hannibal different, I don't think necessarily different is the right word. Definitely wanted it cinematic, but done for obviously a different format and for a format of being on television where you have commercial breaks and all these kind of things. But going back to then the genesis of what would it be, that's where Brian Fuller was the genius and the perfect opportunity and ultimate choice.
Reimagining Hannibal actually fell into my lap in a very fortuitous plane ride where I ran into a friend of mine, Katie O'Connell, who'd just become the CEO of Gaumont Television in the US base, and she had just acquired the rights to the Hannibal character.
And Brian said, "What are you doing, Katie? This new company is fantastic." And she says, "Well, we're going to do Hannibal." And he goes, "Oh, fantastic." And then they go sit down, have the flight.
And she asked me, "Do you think there's a television show in Hannibal?" Not to see if I would do it, but what I just thought of the idea of creating a television show around that character.
After the flight, Brian finds Katie and says, "Great idea. I know exactly what you have to do."
My first question was, do you have the rights to Will Graham? Because for me, that felt like the character that was going to be our window into the world, and it was also a character in the book that hadn't been completely translated to any moving image yet.
They're so rich. There's so much information there, particularly about the character, but just the whole world, And I realized that what Brian is doing is really, I think, trying to go back to the books, trying to be faithful to the books, to kind of explore that world and build on it and create new characters, new scenarios, but staying faithful to Thomas Harris's imagination.
In the films, we saw Will Graham as a very stoic, leading man, investigator, and in the book, he's actually much more of a neurotic. And so it felt like there was an opportunity to tell the story of the Will Graham that exists in the literature in a way that you hadn't seen before.
I want him back in the field. And I've told the board I'm recommending a psych eval.
Are we starting now?
The session wouldn't be with me.
Hannibal Lecter's a better fit. Your relationship's not personal. But if you are more comfortable with Dr. Bloom...
No, I'm not going to be comfortable with anybody inside my head.
He loves the way Thomas Harris writes, and he wanted to respect everything that Thomas had done. This is the key thing. So do I. I mean, so does my company. And that was integral, really, in taking forward the canon of Thomas's writing, of his voice.
It also was the opportunity to tell the story of Hannibal Lecter that you hadn't seen before, a chapter of his life that we hadn't explored, which was when he was a practicing psychiatrist and a practicing cannibal. So that felt like arguably the most interesting chapter of the Hannibal Lecter story, yet it had never been told.
Because Hannibal Lecter, as a character, has been established. He's already in the culture of bad guys. He's the #1 bad guy, actually, rated in the world. So we already have that. But also to see him in action is what's so delicious, what he does.
We know the character from before, obviously. We've seen Anthony Hopkins do it to perfection. So we were not trying to copy that. But having said that, The character is the character.
We had seen him post-incarceration, incarceration, and a glimpse of him as a young man, but never actually when he was a practicing psychiatrist. So I felt like this was an opportunity to really get to know the gentleman that we saw creeping down that long hallway in the last cell on the left.
And so he told her, Katie calls me up, says, you've got to meet Brian. I said, fantastic. So Brian meets me, and he tells me exactly what I want to hear, and boom, we go straight ahead, almost day and date, going over to NBC, Universal.
I had been working with NBC on another project at the time, Mockingbird Lane, which was a remake of The Munsters. And I had been in regular conversations with the president of entertainment at NBC, Jen Salke. And I brought up casually over a cocktail that I was developing a Hannibal Lecter series, and her eyes went wide and said that she wants the project.
Content is king. And oftentimes with the material that we have, very dark, and it could be disturbing. You would think it would be great for cable. In fact, it would fit perfectly at cable. But also the networks are starting to wake up. They have to compete with the cable channels, and they have to be edgy, and they have to attract different audiences back to their channels.
And I said, well, would we really be able to do the franchise and the title justice on network television? And she assured me at that time that we will let you do the show that you want to do. So there was this great promise that was kept.
And that's where we were attracted by NBC, because they were willing to take the risk at 10 o'clock at night. It just was almost, the right timing to do something like Hannibal on television. I think they're one of the first, really, to come out and be edgy with things.
He's like Willy Wonka. Every girl he takes is a candy bar, and hidden in amongst all of those candy bars is the one true intended victim, which, if we follow through in our metaphor, is your golden ticket.
So is he warming up for his golden ticket, or just reliving whatever it is he did to her?
Oh, the golden ticket wouldn't be the first taken, and she wouldn't be the last. He would hide how special she was. I mean, I would. Wouldn't you?
And that was always the intention. We wanted Hannibal to be as elegant of a horror show as the character is a human being. We wanted elegant horror. That was our mission.
And then having our writers play with that and to draw out the manipulation, the conflict. So there's just so many things that are opportunity.
Before he was a bit of a lone wolf in his cage. Now we get to see him out in the world, and there is an inherent danger in seeing that beast walking down the street and knowing what he's capable of, but having no idea when he's going to strike. And the great fun is the audience is in on it. The audience knows who he is.
Tell me about your mother.
Some lazy psychiatry, Dr. Lecter. Low-hanging fruit.
I suspect that fruit is on a high branch. Very difficult to reach.
So is my mother. We start, I would say, a couple of years before the events that are described in Red Dragon, which is the first novel. In Red Dragon, without giving too much away for anybody that hasn't read it, Will Graham and Hannibal have already met. They have a whole history, and that history is touched on very briefly in the novel. And what the creators of the show have done kind of brilliantly is extrapolate from that and really imagine an entire backstory, and that's where we begin.
And there's a great stretch of time. He's already practicing as a psychiatrist. He's got a great history of what was behind him from Eastern Europe, traveling to the States, but, not really questioning what made him be who he was. We don't need to answer that. But what was he doing? He was out. He was in the elite of the Society of Baltimore. He was practicing. And he was also the Chesapeake Ripper. And there are things that have been proven through the other books of the different cases that have woven in and out. I mean, such a lore of his background and what he's done, and we can explore that.
One of the great gifts of this series is that we have the books that we are driving toward. So we know, for instance, on our timeline, that Red Dragon is going to be season 4. So we have 3 seasons where nobody knows what's going to happen except for the writers. And then from that point, all of those events that happen over the course of the first 3 seasons will change and alter slightly the events of the books and enhance them in a way. We want to make sure that we are canon to the books. We would love for this to be the definitive Hannibal Lecter story. So we don't want to discard the books, but we want to sort of read between the lines and see where we can, stick in a jack and crank up those words and get in between them and tell a story that nobody has seen before.